The subway system. I think we have some more calls from our listeners. Next, we have Dave. Hi, Dave. Whereabouts are you? Dave, are you on the line?
I'm from Hamilton.
You're in Hamilton. What's happening there?
Well, we've lost everything, same as everyone else. But I was very interested here that there are some people who still have power. I'd like to know more across the country. The very first thing that struck my mind was this is some kind of terrorist thing. What's going on? So the more I hear that people have power, the more that takes that fear away from me.
Yeah, we're not sure what the cause of it is, but I thank you for your call. It seems that there's definitely an overload situation happening on the hydro grid. Ontario Power Generation hasn't told us exactly what the cause of it is, but our reporters are bringing in information all the time. And joining me now is CBC journalist David Michael Lamb. What can you tell us?
Hi, Avril. Well, I tried to call in actually for the 4:30 news a few minutes ago and was just simply unable to. I was at the corner of Queen and John coming back from another news story in a car, and the two of us in the car started obviously scratching our heads when we saw that no streetlights were working, or rather the traffic lights weren't working. Nothing was. Everyone was sort of just looking around, scratching their heads, wondering what was going on. So I jumped out of the car at that point, and my colleague made his way back to the CBC, and I walked around a bit, obviously, people not knowing what's going on, because you walk into shops, everything's dark, everything's off. A lot of bars and stuff saying, no, don't worry, we're open. We can serve you a beer, but other than that, dark and nothing happening. So I walked over to the subway entrance at Queen and University, and again, just in a very eerie feeling walking downstairs. The emergency lights are on, so there's some light down there, but obviously the escalator's not working, and of course the subway not working either. And some people, oblivious to what was going on, go down and expect to get in the subway, and obviously being turned away because there's no power. So just walking around downtown, it's, as I said, a fairly eerie feeling, because you look around and it's a big city and you expect things are hustling and bustling. There's lots of people around, obviously walking about, and lots of the sirens from fire trucks. I just walking down the street, you could hear a few alarms ringing, I guess, when the power goes off. In some cases, a business or whatever will have their alarm trip.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a fire alarm trip. And so then the fire department is everywhere, right, responding to calls, I'm sure most of which are false.
Well, certainly after the big ice storm in Western Quebec and Eastern Ontario after September 11th, after the Y2K scare, many office towers put into place a number of security measures to mitigate against something like this, and so they will probably be functioning better than others. We're still on the air thanks to an emergency power generation here at the Broadcasting Centre, and we're grateful for that, and we're also grateful for calls from our listeners. Next, we're going to Pat in Brantford. Hi, welcome to CBC Radio 1. Hello, Pat. I think we've lost Pat. Perhaps we should move on to John. Hi, John. Where are you?
I'm on the Lakeshore Boulevard West.
And what's going on there?
What's going on is that the drivers are not observing the four-way stop procedure. And maybe what you can do is to probably send a notice out to let people know that they should slow down and observe the four-stop procedure. It's just crazy what some drivers are doing.
No, you're right. So describe it for us.
Somebody's going to get hurt. I think perhaps the fact that so many people listen to CBC, maybe it might be a good thing to remind them again.
Okay, well, you do the reminding, John. What should they do?
Well, they should just slow down and again observe the four-way stop procedure. And rather than, you've got a number of cars all trying to get through all at the same time, pedestrians trying to cross at the same time, and you can see where as it gets darker, people are going to be panicking. So if people could just slow down and observe the four-stop procedure, I think it's going to, in fact, save some lives, I think, because somebody's going to get hurt.
Well, I appreciate your call, John. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Our phone number here at the CBC Broadcasting Centre is 416-205-5800. Jasmine Seputis has an update now from the CBC Toronto newsroom.
Well, we've been trying to track which cities are being affected and which are not, and this is the latest list that we have. The power is off, obviously, in the Toronto area. We've had reports it's off as well in Ottawa, parts of New York, Detroit, Sudbury, Cleveland, part of the state of New Jersey, Windsor, North North Bay, Toledo, Hamilton, Rochester, and Kingston. There are reports of the power remaining on in Winnipeg, Thunder Bay, St. John's, Newfoundland, Calgary, Montreal, Vancouver, Victoria, Halifax, Boston, and Washington, D.C. reporting the power is on. And that could change at any moment, but that's the latest that we have right now.
All right, thanks, Jasmine Seputis. It's 4:53. You're listening to CBC Radio 1, where we're reporting on a blackout on Here and Now, trying to get a sense of the cause of this and certainly get a sense of the scope of it here in Southern Ontario. Our next caller is Teresa. Welcome to CBC Radio 1. Where are you calling from? Hi, Teresa.
Yes?
Yes.
I'm calling from Simcoe County.
Yes?
And we are out of hydro.
You're out too?
Yes.
And so how is it affecting you?
Oh, very bad, because I was just trying to get some dinner together.
Well, I think you'll have to count on the barbecue for that tonight.
Well, that's nice. I can do that, so
Okay.
that's not a big deal. It's just that it is very inconvenient. We have a small company here, and we cannot do anything anymore.
All right. Well, thanks for your call.
Okay.
I wish you well.
Thank you.
Wish us all well. Right across Southern Ontario and Northeastern United States. Jasmine, you have some more information?
Well, we're just watching what's been happening, monitoring all the different stations to find out what the cause of this is. And there have been reports that the power grid at Niagara Falls could have been overloaded this afternoon. We had hot weather today. That's one of the possibilities that's out there. But really, we're still trying to find out exactly what caused this.
And yet we did get a call from somebody saying that here and there, pockets of Niagara Falls actually had power. So we'll continue to quest for the information that we're looking for, everyone is looking for. David Michael Lamb has some more information for us.
I could just echo a few of the things that some of the callers have been saying. John was talking about how people aren't really obeying the regular traffic signals or the rules of the road. Downtown, that was certainly obvious. I mean, the number of streets I had to cross coming down to the broadcast center from Queen and John, a pretty scary situation, and you do have to be careful crossing the road as a pedestrian. And again, I felt that I wouldn't be at all surprised if I had seen, a fender bender here and there on the crossroads, because people are really just not obeying the rules of where if it were stop signs, they just sort of go when they feel like, and some people are driving too fast. So
well, there's confusion as people are getting off work. You can imagine we're coming up to 5 o'clock. That'll be the big exodus from downtown, and it's likely to get worse. So just keep in mind that not only are subways in Toronto not operating, and in fact, the TTC is evacuating those who were trapped on the trains when they all stopped, came to an abrupt stop, but also the traffic lights, intersections are completely congested. We have another caller. I believe it's Dave. Hi, Dave. Whereabouts are you, Dave? Oh, we seem to have lost Dave. Well, we're working on it. Area code 416-205-5800 is the number to call. We are actually right now going to be turning over to a special edition of Canada at 5. We'll be back with a national news special right afterward, staying with the story, trying to find out what's going on, why the power is out, and why the blackout seemed to be stretching right across such a vast area. It appears that some TV channels are also going off the air. Thankfully, we're still on the air here at CBC Radio 1, so keep it here for the latest information. And now with some more, here's Jim Curran.
Well, some of the calls that are getting through, and had a listener call just a moment ago from Yonge, straightening up Yonge, indicating that at most of the intersections, or many of the intersections, we have police directing, but this listener pointed out that some just regular folk are going out, in particular around Yonge and Highway 407. She said there's a man out there, and he's in the middle of the intersection, and he's directing traffic, and people are obeying and in somewhat of an orderly fashion getting through that area, heading up Yonge through around Highway 407. I believe that's the case at many other intersections as well, where folks are just taking it upon themselves to assist in the traffic flow at this time. And of course, we have all police who can be out there at intersections directing traffic. But if you happen to approach an intersection where the lights are out and there is no one there, please remember you must stop and then proceed through the intersection when it is safe to do so. You yield the right of way. The person on the right state has the right of way through the intersection.
Yeah, that's just a start. Imagine the job the TTC has in getting people out of the subway tunnels, and also the work that building managers and security have getting people out of elevators in the big towers in downtown Toronto. Downtown Toronto is out. Huge power blackout has hit not only areas of Ontario, stretching to Kenora, Timmins, we've heard down to Windsor, but also hitting United States cities, including New York, Cleveland, Detroit, and Boston. You're listening to CBC Radio 1, the beginning of rush hour this afternoon, sometime after 4 o'clock. It was about 4:10 or so. The blackout started, and we were off the air for about 30 seconds, it seemed, but managed to carry on. We're about to get some more information. Our team is working on it. We have reporters at the airports, at the hospitals, trying to make sure that you have all the information you need, not only to get home, but also understand the complexity of what's just hit us this afternoon. And so, if you want to give us a call, 416-205-5800 is the number to call with your information. Now, in the weather forecast, it may be the kind of day where people had their air conditioning on, but it's not it's just unfathomable that it would be the kind of day where there would be such an overload because of heat. We have 30 degrees, that's not so hot, and we have a humidex reading at 38. Tonight, clear skies with a low of 18, a mix of sun and cloud tomorrow with a high of 31. And we are looking forward to a slight chance of showers on Saturday. Environment Canada says there's about a 40% probability of precipitation and a high of 27 in the forecast for Saturday. You're listening to CBC Radio 199.1. I'm Avril Benoit. Our special coverage of the power outage, the blackout, continues right here. Stay with us.
They say it's important to eat a good breakfast every morning. We at Metro Morning believe it's just as important to nourish your brain at the same time. Hi, I'm Andy Berry. We offer a daily menu of interviews with the Toronto newsmakers, plus sports, traffic, weather, and regular news reports. Brain food for the curious. Metro Morning, weekdays from 6 to 8:30 on CBC Radio 1.
Trying to figure out what's going on here, but people should just stay calm and not get in their car to go drive.
A power plant in Manhattan, on the island of Manhattan. It's a Con Edison plant, and at first we were hearing reports there were fires at that plant, and that shut things down in the New York area. Well, we've now heard from Michael Bloomberg, the New York mayor, and he says there was no fire. That people did see black smoke rising from the power plant in suburban or downtown Manhattan, but we now know there was a problem. We don't know what the problem was, but because of the problem, the power station just began to shut itself down automatically, and the mayor says it's normal for the black smoke to rise out. Now, what happens when there's a shutdown of this effect, a circuit basically switches and it turns itself off, but it's a massive circuit that turned itself off, and it involves the Niagara-Mohawk grid, and that's where Toronto and Ottawa and other cities become involved, because as the circuit turned itself off, it sort of advanced, it sort of skipped throughout the northeastern part of the United States and into Canada. So what we know right now is everyone who's on that grid, and as those cities that you read, including Toronto and Ottawa and Detroit, there is no power because of what's happened in New York. Now, of course, it's odd that this one power plant would be causing such a huge problem in this part of the world, but because of the safety mechanisms, that's why everything is shut down. Here in Canada, we have been on the phone with different power providers, and they, as Pia said, they are in the dark themselves. They're not sure why this has happened, but right now that we've been assured that they are in the process of trying to get this fixed and power back on to Canadian customers, and there's got to be millions of them without power right now.
Well, it's good to know that this is a terrible situation that these cities find themselves in, but they have pinpointed the cause of this massive, huge power blackout.
That's right. We've just heard some reassuring news from Washington. The American Federal Emergency Response Agency has ruled out terrorism right now. So we know it's a problem at a New York power plant. And to the people who are listening at home, there is, according to Washington, no reason to panic right now.
Thanks very much, Derek. Derek Stoffel in Toronto. We're now going to go to Frank Collar in Washington. Hello, Frank.
Good afternoon.
Now, what about Washington? Is Washington in the dark?
No, we're sadly, it's a bright, sunny, very hot day here today, but most important for us is that the power is still on. It's about 33 degrees here today, 91. There's been no sign since 4 o'clock when this first began to start to the north of me, up towards you. There's been no flickering of power at all here, and we've had, no problems at all. I did just get off the phone with a representative of the FBI, and they say at this point that this is obviously a big concern here. There's been absolutely no indication of any terrorist activity as to what they know, and they were very strong in emphasizing that. And I did hear Mayor Bloomberg in New York say exactly the same thing a few moments ago. It would seem by all accounts that this is a natural event. It's, as everybody knows, it's extremely hot in eastern North America, and that seems to be what the cause of this is.
Frank, what was the initial reaction in Washington? I mean, a lot of people in our newsroom, the first thing that you thought of was some kind of a terrorist attack.
You do, although I have to say it's been very hot here for about 10 days, and I don't think here in the office, I've not had a chance to get out since this started about 45 minutes ago. I haven't been out on the streets. I've just been phoning around here. I think people have said, it's really hot. We do get power breakdowns here in Washington, D.C. We had several last summer. Every summer that I've been here, in that sense, that's a common occurrence. I haven't sensed here a great deal of concern about terrorism. Obviously, if you were in a subway in New York City, that would be a whole different matter. And naturally, in that city, I think people would be very nervous. But here, and in the sense I get of phoning around, trying to get people in New York, so far people don't seem terribly panicked. And I think the announcements from the mayor, and as the other news starts to filter through to people, I guess, on battery radios, I think that'll hopefully maintain a sense of calm.
All right, Frank, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Frank Collar in Washington, and I'm joined now by Avril Benoit, host of the afternoon show here in Toronto, Here and Now. Hi, Avril. You've been on the air for the last half hour or so with broadcasting to our listeners about this power blackout.
That's right. I host the afternoon show in Toronto, stretching across southern Ontario, and we actually blacked out. We went off the air, we dropped right out, and then our emergency generator kicked in, and we were back on the air, though it sounds like the people who are able to hear us on car radios and battery radios are looking for information. It is rush hour in Toronto. People are coming off work, even more so now, and the subways had to be evacuated. People are trying to get out of elevators in office towers. One citizen, taking a look at a congested intersection, took it upon himself to actually start directing traffic, put himself in the middle, and started waving around hands because it's chaos out there, kidding. And people are not yielding to the right as they should when lights are out at intersections. Now, CBC Radio has been talking to people affected by the blackout in our listening area across southern Ontario. Here's what one caller told me earlier this afternoon.
The traffic coming along Parkway for us to go up and down Don Mills is a little touchy. There's no power in this building and the water's out.
The water as well, okay.
Yeah.
And what about you and your neighbors on the 17th floor?
Well, there's actually just the emergency lights, and they're telling people, to stay in their units.
one of the people who called in to us to describe exactly what was going on. Now, she was worried that as her husband came home, he'd have to climb all the 17 stories to get back up to their apartment. People are quite disrupted by this. They're out of sorts. And the person who keeps an eye on how things are going on the roads for us on the Drive Time show is Jim Curran, who joins us now. Jim, what's the latest?
Well, the latest we have from the Toronto Transit Commission is that they continue to assist people leaving the subway system. Of course, when the power went out, many trains were stuck between stations, and they've had TTC staff going through the tunnels and assisting people, so they're trying to clear all of the subway system at this time. I've had many more calls, you mentioned just a short time ago, where regular citizens are going out directing traffic. We have all police who are available directing traffic through the major intersections, but there are many others, and again, we've been warning people, please, when you approach an intersection, treat it as a stop before you proceed. Just had another listener call who said he's just about out of gas, and of course the gas stations are unable to pump gas. So that is another issue that people on the go have to face. And unrelated to traffic, I had a listener call who works at a major data center, and he said they've had to shut down because their battery power kicked in, and their batteries have now drained away. And because their data center is in Toronto, they've had to shut down their whole system across Canada, and so their offices across Canada, of course, have to close as well.
Well, anybody doing business with Toronto from anywhere in the world is going to be affected by this, as they will start to get word that things have ended early.
Jim, you talked about the subway system. Is there some kind of emergency generator system that they can get some of those trains moving out of the tunnels and to the station so people can get out?
Apparently not. That is not what has happened anyway. The people were in those trains being advised from the Transit Control Center what the situation was. So they were waiting. Obviously, none of us know when the power is going to come back on again. But then they soon decided that they couldn't keep people in the tunnels any longer. So it started moving people out about 3/4 of an hour ago.
How is that done? I mean, you're in a dark tunnel, and some of us took the subway to work today. It's about 30 degrees outside in Toronto and a lot hotter in the tunnels. How is that conducted? I mean, with a flashlight system and some kind of emergency lighting inside the tunnel?
Yes, not having experienced it myself, fortunately, but they do have emergency lighting to begin, and then they have staff who approach the trains, inform everyone what has happened, and then people just exit the trains and follow in a straight line. And indeed, I believe someone walks with a flashlight along the line to the closest subway station, and then one gets up onto the platform and then out of the station. So it takes time, obviously, because they're doing it in a slow, calculated manner.
Yeah, this is not only happening in Toronto with the subways. New York City's subways have also been shut down, and we can see images, or at least before the television stopped working, we could see images of people exiting the various subway stations in New York, and the numbers there are so many-fold the numbers in Toronto, which even by any comparison in Canada are vast.
What are the numbers per day using the Toronto Transit Commission? I've heard a million people.
Yes,
basically.
Easily.
And this is summer, so they'd be less. But even still, this is a lot of people during rush hour.
Absolutely. There's one more point, and again, this is unrelated to traffic, and that is many people, of course, trying to keep in touch with people using their cell phones. And I'm also told that much of the power is now failing on some of the relay areas, the towers, because they too run on batteries. So we are receiving some calls, but it's actually becoming fewer and fewer as time goes on.
You're listening to a CBC Radio News special on this massive blackout which has hit Toronto, Ottawa, New York, Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, and various other cities in eastern North America. The word is that there was a power station failure in Manhattan, and it's had a ripple effect through all of these cities. Kurt Petrovich is on the line from Ottawa. Kurt, hello? Kurt is not on the line in Ottawa. All right, Ottawa is one of the cities that has been plunged into darkness. David Michael Lamb has been on the streets of Toronto, Toronto reporter. David, what have you been finding?
Well, I was out actually covering another story completely different when this happened. And just this afternoon, I was actually driving back with another CBC reporter from this interview I was conducting, and obviously it was mysterious to us that the traffic lights weren't working and so on. At one point, I jumped out at a downtown intersection just to take a closer look around, and as you can imagine, shops were dark and people were scratching their heads and not knowing what was going on. But I can echo some of this traffic chaos as well. This was in the immediate minutes after this blackout occurred, and there was certainly no citizens going out directing traffic. There was I wasn't surprised if I was going to see something like a fender bender or a pedestrian get hit by a car, because it was complete traffic chaos. I also went over to the nearest subway station, the one closest to that I was at, just sort of look around, and emergency lighting was certainly on in the right when you go down to pay your fare and that sort of thing. But obviously escalators were shut down and nothing was moving. And some people who didn't really know what was going on were walking down to get on the trains, but obviously were then turned away.
What were people saying?
Well, people saying, well, they don't know what's going on. And immediately everyone goes to grab their mobile phone and tries to, as I did, I tried to call in while I was out there to report here on the radio, and it was utterly impossible to get through anywhere. So people talking to each other saying, I don't know what's going on here, why it's not just the traffic lights it's out, it's the shops, it's everything, which was quite odd. And you sort of gaze at the skyline of the city, and your imagination just sort of thinks, wow, there's no power here anywhere.
No, that's the thing. It's not only mobile phones and water in some cases when there's an electrical pump, air conditioners, ventilation. We're likely to hear lots of stories of valiant elevator escapes from the various skyscrapers in Toronto. And of course, we're quite concerned about how the blackout is affecting medical services. Dr. Jay Keystone is with us from Toronto General Hospital. Hello, Dr. Keystone. Hello, Dr. Keystone, are you with us? We appear to have lost him. Perhaps another phone problem. We seem to be experiencing a number of these problems here at the CBC, trying as we can. We're also having some computer problems here and there. But we do have another reporter calling in.
That's right. Kurt Petrovich is in Ottawa. Hello, Kurt.
Hi there. Good afternoon.
What is the situation in Ottawa, Kurt? I understand that the power is out there as well.
It certainly is. I'm sitting in a darkened studio right now. We do have emergency power to some parts of the building, some critical parts. But if you take a walk outside today, it's quite a surreal scene. The streets are, of course, clogged with automobiles. The lights, of course, are out. But you really can't hear anybody getting too terribly upset about it. There aren't any car horns going off. People seem to understand, at least behind the wheel, what's going on. However, Ottawa is in the middle of high season for tourists, and with people touring the Parliament buildings and monuments and museums here, there are a lot of people who don't even realize what's going on because they're on vacation and they're not dependent, at least for the next little while, on electricity. And so you've got quite an interesting scene. However, it is obviously a very serious situation, and Ottawa is the center of the Office of Critical Infrastructure Protection and Emergency Preparedness. Needless to say, it's very difficult to get them on the phone this afternoon to see what they know about the nature of what's happened. The best I could do is to speak with an individual at the emergency number who told me that they too are struggling to get as much information as possible, but as of about 20 minutes ago or so, they didn't believe that this had anything to do with terrorism, that it was simply a matter of an overloaded grid. And that was the nature of the problem. Beyond that, they couldn't give me much more information. We do know that here in Ottawa, the police have advised people to, of course, stay out of their cars and stay off the road, just as a measure to try and make sure that the problems don't get any worse on the streets.
That buzzer that you're hearing is the CBC's emergency audio system. We should just listen to this.
Power failure. The building is operating under emergency power. All non-essential persons.
being inundated with phone calls tonight. You can imagine coming out of the subway system. The subways in Toronto have stopped, many of them inside tunnels, not even making it to the stations. Many of these commuters coming out drenched, sweaty, walking through air-conditioned tunnels and up to the ground level.
It goes fast busy, but that's why it's happening for you on News Talk 1010 CFRB, Mix 99 and Easy Rock 97.3, continuing coverage of the blackout. Our time right now is 5:23 for those who are concerned. If you're on the drive home right now, treat all intersections with non-functioning traffic signals as all-way stops. It's going to take a while to get through this. So far, we are 1 minute and 13 minutes into a blackout, which is still unexplained. However, we're passing it along to you as soon as we get the information, passing it along to you. Let's go in and check in on the all-day traffic center.
So we're all closed, waiting outside.
Now, how are you seeing people driving? Are people being okay with it?
Some people are, angry that things are closed, so they're not driving very happy.
They just don't understand yet, so we're trying to fill everybody in.
The best thing that you can do is just be patient in, a situation like this, because
Absolutely.
You can't rush to get home. You don't have power there either,
Yeah, exactly, and that is the most important thing. Thank you for calling. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, in East Amherst, Ransomville, and Lewiston, you do not have power?
Bits and pieces of Lewiston are, out, but definitely Ransomville and Sanborn area, bits and pieces in there. We have no power whatsoever.
Now, you're calling me on a hardline phone or a cell phone?
I'm on a cell phone now. I just left my house. I had no power for the last, 2 hours.
Right. Now, have you had problems getting through on your cell phone? Because I have.
Oh, yeah. I had problems, definitely, in fact, calling you.
Right.
It took me at least 15 minutes just to call you guys.
All right. I'm glad you tried, though. That's important information. Thank you.
You're...
Hi, Kiss 98.5.
We have power in Colorado.
All of those operations.
Becomes available on Energy FM at 93.1.
Wow. For instance, we have reports that Niagara Falls has not suffered any outage, as well as places like Grimsby. However, in spite of that, across the GTA, gridlock traffic, problems with people headed in directions and not knowing exactly what is going on. Well, let's tell you that right now, you're probably best sitting tight. Stay where you are, and we'll keep you up to date as we go on. News Talk 1010 time, 5:29. We have the latest coming up in an update from CFRB News, and we will pass that along to you as well. Once again, how are you coping with cellular? It's toll-free out of town at 1-800-561-CFRB. Let's go off and talk to David on the 407. Hi, David.
Hi. The traffic is very slow, like everywhere else, I'm sure. But a couple observations. One of them, when I was on the city streets, nobody's following the rule that you keep repeating over and over again. There's more like an ebb
This
and a flow.
surprises you?
Sorry?
This surprises you?
No, but I think that somehow that ebb and flow where maybe cars go for 10 or 15 seconds and then they go back and forth, it makes sense. My question is I'm on the highway. I have a half a tank of gas. Okay, I have to go pick up my in-laws because they're stuck at the airport. I have to come pick them up. But are gas stations open if I need to fill up for gas without
gas
power?
pumps are electric, and I'm afraid you're going to be out of luck. At this moment in time, the gas pumps are electric. You're not going to be able to do anything, at least to the best of my knowledge. So,
well, that's another problem for a lot of people who are maybe low in gas.
well, let's hope this doesn't continue for too much longer. But currently, we are into 1 hour and 20 minutes of blackout with no report of any end in sight. We will find out more as we take you for an update from the CFRB newsroom on News Talk 1010 CFRB, Mix 99.9 and Easy Rock 97.3.
To do that right now. We will now.
I'm walking all the way back. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Have you ever been through a power outage like this?
November 1965.
Where were you when the lights went out then?
Haven't the faintest idea. I was a little guy.
Now today, where were you when the power went off?
Of course, after covering this story, hopefully the lights coming or the electricity coming back up.
This happened.
Well, not much in particular until I heard it went all the way to, where does it go? Los Angeles?
It goes as far as the Eastern Seaboard, no, but, that's going a little too far. Eastern Seaboard, so we're talking about Boston and Cleveland and New York City as well, Southern Ontario, right from Windsor to Ottawa.
Well, I blame the Tories.
Now, there'll be no political shenanigans right now.
All of life is political.
Now, how are you going to get home?
Walk, probably.
Where is home?
Bayview and Eglinton.
And again, the situation when you arrive at home, where do you live? In what kind of building or house?
I'm in a house. We'll deal with it. At least it's not winter.
Well, your freezer, if you were planning on steaks tonight, no problem. They'll be thawed by the time you get home.
I'm afraid so.
What if this goes on for hours on end?
Well, I just feel sorry for the old folks, for people who are sick, people in hospitals, and I wonder what happened when the subways ground to a halt. So I don't really mind it, but I worry for the old folks.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay. We're pointing over this way. What's that, Nancy?
We're just going to go over
We're going to go over here. Oh, very good. I guess we were blocking the intersection. Sorry about that. Let's see who's doing what over here. I don't know how far we can reach. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, how are you?
There's a power outage, and you're standing in line for a hot dog.
Well, nothing better to do, you know. So
Where were you when the power went out?
we're sitting in the Bull down the road, the pub. What's it called? The Black Bull. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Sitting down there having a beer, yeah.
And your intentions for this evening? What were your plans? What will change?
We were going to go to the cinema, right? But unfortunately, I think those plans are over now, yeah. So
Does it surprise you in the year 2003 in a country like Canada and also the U.S. that something like this could happen?
well, I think it's quite a shock still, yeah. I mean, I think, well, definitely, yeah. I mean, you don't really realise how sort of, how much we appreciate things like electricity and all the conveniences we have until they're gone, right?
Particularly cell phones. I think people are in shock that their cell phones aren't working. Now, it's not quite 6 o'clock. This has been going on for almost 2 hours. What happens if it goes on for several more?
Make for a quiet evening.
Where would you recommend one goes to try and cool off on a night like tonight? Somebody just answered for us, a swimming pool. That's right. Well, there's a gentleman coming in, 19 years old, trying to be the youngest man to cross Lake Ontario. There may be others joining him.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Involuntarily as well, I think, yeah.
Now, obviously, this is no laughing matter, but I know, as always, Torontonians and people visiting the city try to make the best of a situation. We do not know how long this power outage will last. Everybody is trying to make the best. Hello. How are you? Oh, yeah, there's a power outage.
Okay, what happened?
Well, you're ready for it, I guess.
Yeah, just taking it easy.
Thank you very much. All right, you take it easy. Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
You're live on CP24. Do you mind speaking with us?
That's fine.
All right. Now, you weren't around when there was a great power outage in '65. This could be the big one in 2003. Does it surprise you that the power could go out in this province?
Am I surprised? Well, it's initially surprising, but you get used to it, I guess. It's pretty fascinating to see how things work, though.
Yeah, or don't work. Where were you when the power went out?
In a condominium on the 30th floor. We came down the staircase, so it was a bit of a walk, but fortunately it was down. I don't know how we're going to get back up again.
And do you plan to get back up again?
Hopefully by the end of the night, yes.
Any ideas on how to stay cool in a situation like this? The last big power outage, it was November, I believe, and a lot cooler than this, that's for sure.
Well, some of the big downtown buildings were pretty nice and cool, but they seem to be locking their doors now, so I'm not sure.
Now, if we can widen out, Bob back in audio mentioned this, and you're right. You're wearing a New York City subway T-shirt. Why?
Oh, I'm just a railway fan myself. I like trains and subways. Actually, I was hoping to look at what's happening to the subway here right now.
Well, in New York City, a lot of people are trapped in the subways.
Oh, really? It's out in New York as well.
It is as well.
I didn't know what the cause was, but...
Any suggestions? Obviously, you study railway travel and train travel and subway travel.
Oh, I don't know. Probably stay away, walk. I don't know. Electric trains would be out. The GO trains seem to be running just fine because I guess they're diesel.
Communication is really tough, and that's what's really a difficult challenge for all of us. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. I appreciate it. All right, we are still outside. We're right now on John Street, just south of Queen, and I'm looking at people as they are just making their way home. They're trying to figure out what's going on. They're driving carefully. They're paying attention to those who've taken over the intersections. They're asking us questions. We're trying to give them the answers, but it's pretty tough because not everybody knows what's going on. What we do know is that there is a power outage that stretches along the eastern seaboard and southern Ontario from Windsor right over to Ottawa, and it has caused quite a lot of chaos and trouble for airports and for people driving, and as many of the people walking by me have expressed, they're concerned about their neighbors, about the elderly, about those in hospital, about their animals who are at home, and those who can't fend for themselves in situations like this. David?
Okay, Ann, thank you very much. It's amazing as to how this continues to unfold. You are watching our coverage here on Cable Calls 24.
Panic. People started to panic, thinking that the Con Ed building was on fire.
Now, no concerns on your end, but I understand there is an emergency declaration in New York City as well?
Yeah, we are in what's considered a New York State declaration of emergency here, because actually the biggest thing here in New York that is of concern to the elected officials here, my boss as well as other elected officials, is the heat. It's 90 degrees right now at this hour at almost 6 o'clock, and people are walking. They're without air conditioning. You have 8 million people in the city, 8 million that have been counted, so there's probably 9 million people in the city, and that's our concern right now is senior citizens and people getting food, boxed food, and that kind of thing. The heat is the biggest concern, and people that are actually stuck on the subway, so they're underground.
Lupe Todd of the City Council of New York, thank you for joining us from New York City and letting us know what's going on there. With Mark Elliott at News Talk 1010, we had a baby boom way back when the power stayed off. We're hoping the power is going to come back sometime soon, but we're giving you continuing coverage of the emergency and what is happening right now with the generalized blackout here on News Talk 1010 CFRB Toronto, Mix 99.9 FM, and Easy Rock 97.3. Let's go to the all-day traffic center.
Good afternoon. I'm Judy Kroon. Major routes are packed, as you can imagine. Let's check out the DVP 404 first with Guy Valentine.
Well, Loftley Gardner is where it starts to slow down. It barely crawls, and it continues quite heavy all the way up to about Major Mackenzie, and that's where things start to open up for drivers on the Parkway and the 404. Southbound 404 Don Valley slows through Highway 7, and that slowdown continues down to about the Lawrence area before things open up. Now, if you're thinking some of the options like Woodbine or Leslie or Don Mills, don't even bother. None of them are moving along at all. Now, strangely enough, we went as far up as Highway 9 up in Newmarket. We've checked out Highway 9 traffic, essentially between the 404 and 400 now in most of the major intersections, specifically through Yonge and Davis. We do have what looks to be police on point duty. So that's some good news. Right now, off of my left wing, I'm looking at traffic heading up the 400 northbound, which is extremely slow in sections, up to about King Road. And that's where things start to open up now. Right over Canada's Wonderland is where we're flying. A lot of folks are trying to get out of the park right now. A lot are still inside the park. There are none of the rides that are working. The water park seems to be full, but that seems to be the place. If you want to cool off at Wonderland, at least, that would be the one I'd be going to, that's for sure. Guy Valentine, CFRB Skywatch traffic.
QEW westbound on the brakes jammed on and off through to Mississauga. 407 eastbound, normally a smooth sail this time. Also feeling the pinch, though, this afternoon. By the way, for folks who think they're hopping on the 407 getting a free ride, not so. They have a backup system. A couple of accidents out there. 401 westbound. I know, shoot. But it's for a couple of hours. We're not sure how long it'll last. 401 westbound collectors, as you're exiting to Victoria Park, look out for a crash there in Whitby. 401 eastbound at Simcoe, a crash there off to the shoulder. 427 northbound at the 409. Couple of lanes blocked there because of a collision. City streets, by the way, Finch and Bathurst, we have a fender bender being cleared. CFRB traffic for Canadian Tire, where right now you can get everything your kids need and want for school at great prices. Back to school starts at Canadian Tire. From the CFRB All-Day Traffic Center, I'm Judy Kroon. Your next report at 6 o'clock.
We are joined, of course, on News Talk 1010 CFRB with Mix 99.9 FM and Easy Rock 97.3, covering the ongoing emergency situation which has happened with this blackout that began at 4:10 this afternoon. Subways closed. Want to remind you there are buses. However, you would even run into problems if you're walking because of course, throngs of people on the streets. And that's one of the things that I'm sure we'll hear about from Chris Mavridis of News Talk 1010. Chris?
Yeah, Mark, it's shoulder to shoulder here on Yonge Street, packed, in fact, right just north of Queen Street, usually an area bustling with people struggling to get onto the subway. This time they're struggling to walk home. It is jam-packed here on the sideway. Traffic is still moving, albeit incredibly slowly, so there's not a lot of walking happening on the streets. Police are controlling traffic at several of the intersections here on Yonge Street. But again, a reminder, and we're going to bang it into your head all day long, if there are no lights, which you know what, you're going to find a lot of that, it's a four-way stop. Remember that. Otherwise, there are buses running as far as TTC is concerned. No streetcars, obviously, but there are buses. Good luck getting onto one. They are crammed, the one or two that I've seen drive by, and the fact that they're driving by at a stellar speed of about 2 kilometers an hour will tell you that it is not a very quick ride home tonight. Mark?
Thank you, Chris.
Oh, one more thing before I forget. A couple quick notes. Cell phones aren't really working. There's a couple of cell phone sites in the city that are battery operated on backup generators. They're working. The rest aren't. So if you're trying to call home, tell them you're going to be late. Keep trying. They're really busy. Also, if you're trying to fill up that tank, it's not going to happen tonight. All gas stations are pretty much closed in the city. That's because most gas pumps, I guess all gas pumps, are electronic.
I want to remind people as well that the regular phone system has its own power supply, so phones are functioning. Regular landlines, it may be a new experience for many of our listeners on News Talk 1010. Chris Mavridis, downtown in Toronto. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thanks, man.
On News Talk 1010, Mix 99.9 and Easy Rock 97.3. I want to remind you as well, I'm being told, asking people not to use 911 unless it is an emergency. And it's not an emergency if it's hot and it's dark, okay? Don't call 911 except in case of emergency. Want to remind you as well that many people heading off to the stores, if you need batteries, we have had reports. There's a run. Guess what? People are thinking this may be long haul. As we still sit here in the dark in downtown Toronto at News Talk 1010 CFRB, Mix 99.9 and Easy Rock 97.3. Ongoing coverage of a blackout that began this afternoon at 4:10. You probably will remember where you were when it happened. It seems to be lasting longer than we were expecting. However, what happens in situations like this is that they have to determine where the blackout began, then get the grid back up. There are generating stations that can take over. And the usual problem is that one problem in one area causes a cascade effect with problem transfers all the power to the next area. That goes and gets overloaded, then that gets overloaded, and so on. It just keeps on going. Currently, as we speak, the power is out from Detroit, Michigan in the west, east to Ottawa. All of southern Ontario is in a state of darkness. Central New York, all the way through New York State, parts of Rhode Island as well. We've got reports that the lights are still on in the rest of New England. However, parts of Connecticut as well are out. There have been reports of fires which have been happening. I want to remind you there is no firm information. Earlier we spoke to someone from Toronto Hydro, and they were giving us the information that they are waiting for the word in order to turn the power back on, in order to get the grids working, and that's going to have to come from Hydro One. On News Talk 1010 CFRB Toronto, Mix 99.9, Easy Rock 97.3. How are you coping? 416-872-1010. Star Talk on your cellular. Let's go to Tracy. Hi, Tracy. You're on News Talk 1010.
Hey, how are you?
I'm in the dark.
I just pulled in my driveway.
And?
I left work about 20 to 5. I work at Roncesvalles, Dundas area. And for the most part, the drivers were pretty good. There's a few idiots who don't know when there's a four-way stop. It looks like some people have no clue what's going on. They just drive right through everything.
Yeah.
But in a lot of the intersections, there were just regular citizens out there directing traffic.
And more, our hats have to be off to them because a lot of people are taking the time, getting out of their cars, and really becoming good Samaritans this afternoon. It's certainly a pleasure to hear about it. Gloria in Etobicoke, you're on News Talk 1010 with Mark Elliott.
Hi, I was in Barrie when it went off, and it was a good drive all the way down Black Creek. I came along Eglinton and Royal York. I want to make a comment that the Good Samaritans and the police are out there It's 33 Celsius. If anybody has water in their car to give those people at intersection, we'll keep them on the job, okay?
Here, you got it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining in on News Talk 1010 CFRB Toronto, Mix 99.9 FM and Easy Rock 97.3. Ongoing coverage of the blackout. Let's go to Dan in Mississauga. Hi, Dan.
Hi there. Give those Good Samaritans a hat if you can, too. They're going to need something to keep them in the shade. They're doing a great job out there. I'm just ready to crack open a beer and get the barbecue going. My wife's on her way home. She just called a little while ago. And just a quick top-up on that note of the black smoke out of Petro-Canada. That's just a controlled flare. That's the way they release pressure and keep things under control. So nothing to worry about there.
Dan, thank you for the input. It's always nice. Guy Valentine had to go out and investigate that because he saw it on the horizon. Just coming up on 6 o'clock, we are doing ongoing coverage of what is happening with a generalized blackout throughout southern Ontario and the eastern seaboard of New York. Happening with you on News Talk 1010 CFRB Toronto. Also, Mix 99.9 has joined us, as has Easy Rock 97.3. Regular programming off the air because, of course, we've got an emergency happening. I'm sure lots of people planning on getting things together on the barbecue tonight, including myself. I don't know if I want to brave the traffic home. We'll find out. Meantime, subways closed. There are buses. Traffic signals out. All intersections are all-way stops. And that applies for everybody. You're listening to ongoing coverage of the blackout with News Talk 1010 CFRB Toronto. Michael Corrin is coming up next, and you're with News Talk 1010 CFRB, Mix 99.9 and Easy Rock 97.3.
News Talk. On News Talk 1010 CFRB, Mix 99.9 and Easy Rock 97.3. We are not alone. A massive power failure has left the entire province and much of the Northeast United States without electricity. News Talk 1010, traffic and weather together. First, CFRB Skywatch traffic.
Traffic has been crippled by this blackout, and every single route that we've checked out, with the exception of the 401 westbound, there are portions of it cutting across the top of the city that are actually mobile. Right now, though, we are flying alongside Highway 407. Is at an absolute standstill, heading westbound from the 404 out to at least Highway 427. We'll recheck the route again in just a little while. Eastbound 407 traffic also on the heavy side, at least from the Highway 27 area out to about Kiel before things break up, and then heavy again from the 404 all the way out to Markham Road. There's quite a lineup getting off at 9th line as well. We also noticed that Highway 7, if you want to use that as a northern option to the 407, Highway 7 is busy, especially tight through Kiel and Jane and some other intersections. Nothing as bad as those two, as Jane and Kiel, but definitely Highway 7, a much better choice from what we can see. The Gardner, the QEW, just a long lineup either in or out of the downtown core. The Don Valley Parkway is not much better off of relief northbound as you get up past Major Mackenzie. Guy Valentine, CFRB Skywatch traffic. Our next traffic update at 6:15.
News Talk 1010 CFRB Toronto weather from the Weather Network. Clear tonight, a low near 18 degrees. Sunny and hot tomorrow. Right now it's 31. That's 88 Fahrenheit. In the news, it's been almost 2 hours since the lights went out, the computers shut down, the traffic signals went dead, and the subway stopped running. It is a massive power failure. All of Ontario, most of New York State, parts of Ohio and Michigan do not have electricity. It happened at about 4:10. There is no word on when power will be restored, and the cause is still unclear. The U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington says a problem at a power plant in New York City appears to be the source of the trouble, destabilizing the Northeast power grid. New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg has suggested it started in Canada. CFRB's Lisa Nacarado has been talking to officials at Ontario Power Generation and the Energy Ministry. Lisa, bring us up to date.
But I just got off the phone with a spokesperson for Ontario's Energy Ministry. She says right now the independent electricity market operator is speaking to energy officials in the U.S. to try to determine exactly what the problem is. As well, the Premier and Energy Minister John Baird are speaking over the phone and are expected to release a statement sometime this evening once they have all the facts about this massive power blackout. Now, according to Ontario Power Generation, all of its electricity generating stations are sitting idle. They are not producing power. However, spokesman John Earl says they are being safely maintained and will be ready to resume power generation when that becomes possible. Live in Thornhill, Lisa Nacarado, CFRB News.
The City of Toronto is setting up an emergency command center at this moment to coordinate operations of police, fire, and so on. Police are asking people not to call 911 unless it is a serious, genuine emergency. The system is in danger of being overloaded. CFRB's Silvana Aceto is at police headquarters.
Police are on top of things. Sergeant Jim Muscat says an emergency response plan is in place. He says every available officer has been called in and deployed. Now, Muscat is reminding people to remain calm.
And essentially what we're trying to do is encourage people who are in their homes to stay home. People that are driving a motor vehicle, we encourage those people to take their time, take a nice slow pace when they're driving throughout the streets.
Muscat says officers will be directing traffic at as many intersections as possible and stresses all phone lines are still working. So if there is an emergency, you can call 911 and police and EMS will respond. At police headquarters, Silvana Aceto, CFRB News.
The power failure is affecting operations at Pearson Airport, of course, in a big way. If you have a flight out tonight, you may not make it. CFRB's Farah Nasser is at the airport.
I'm standing outside the airport command post and departures at Terminal 2. Officials tell me North American flights from Pearson are all grounded. They're telling people who can even make their way to Pearson Airport to stay at home. There's minimal movement in Terminal 1. That's the international terminal where international flights get out. They are, though, trying to restore those flights. So North American flights completely shut down. If you are going in any destination in North America, stay at home. International flights, as of now, are grounded as well, but they may resume shortly. At Pearson Airport, Farah Nasser, CFRB News.
Now, of course, there are no traffic signals working at any intersection in the city. Motorists are reminded to treat every intersection as a four-way stop. Yes, it makes for a slow trip home, but better to get there alive. The subway shut down. Mika Ski of the TTC says no one was stranded.
Right now, the subways are not working. Everything, all subway lines and all subways and tunnels and at stations are at stop and stay, so people are being safely let out of the subway stations and out of all subway situations.
Figarello. I'm from London, England, and we had a coach from the airport in Toronto dropped me at the Royal York, and I went to Union Station to get a ticket, was told that the whole power on the eastern seaboard is down.
Not a great first impression, he says, and not a fun walk, especially lugging 2 suitcases.
But what is nice is everybody's smiling.
Subway trains are stopped in Toronto, so is every single streetcar. On Yonge Street, Chris Mavridi, CFRB News.
Well, we do have word from Go Transit, though, that its operations are continuing pretty much as normal. There may be some delays. We have been getting reports of people heading out to stock up on flashlights and batteries. We don't know how long this power failure will last. CFRB's A.G. Cly is at a convenience store. A.G., where are you and what's happening?
I'm here at a convenience store in McCall and Queen Street, right downtown. They're doing a brisk business on emergency supplies, principally batteries, candles, and water. The store actually still has a number of batteries left, but D batteries, the large ones for flashlights, those are going quickly. Also, almost everyone's leaving with at least 2 bottles of water. And I talked to one gentleman who was picking some candles for tonight. He said he's not too worried about it, but he's just stocking up because in case this lasts too long. David?
Thank you very much, CFRB's A.G. Cly. So, to recap, once again, a massive power outage has struck Ontario and much of the eastern United States, knocking out some subway service, all subway service in this country, office workers streaming into the streets. Cell phone service also affected for many, many people. The Pentagon and New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg have made a point of saying there is no evidence that this outage is related in any way to an act of terrorism. A couple of other notes about the day's news. A man believed to be a terrorist has been captured. We're not sure where. He goes by the name Hambali. The White House describes him as al-Qaeda's chief representative and operational planner in Southeast Asia. U.S. officials are calling his apprehension a significant blow to the enemy. Hambali is believed to have had something to do with the bombing in Bali last year that killed more than 200 people. It appears the scheduled 25% pay hike for provincial politicians is dead. Ernie Eves will
also be checking in with the head at Pearson International Airport because there are a number of flights that have been affected. We're going to hear about the cancellations in just a moment, so hang on to hear about that. Now, the CBC's Pia Chattopadhyay is here with the latest on what's happening at street level in Toronto.
Just back from street level, Avril. Actually, I tried to take one of our vans out from the building here, and it was a no-go, so to speak. It's taking ages to make a left turn, which what I was trying to do, so I dumped the van and headed out on foot. It's quite an interesting scene out there. Clearly, the message has gotten out to people that we are facing this power shortage if they haven't seen it for themselves, but it's very calm out there. Some interesting things. In the age of cell phones, they're down, so lines at payphones are very long. People are trying to call their relatives and their friends, tell them what's going on. Also, several cars are parked. They're beached, so to speak, and they've got their doors wide open, the radio's blaring so people can get their information, hear what's going on. So people are taking this in stride for the most part. It is busy, though. There are people walking. They've given up on trying to get home any other way. Clearly, we don't know when the power is going to be back on, so they're making do with their feet.
Well, they're trying to get information, and who can blame them for being frustrated about that? Television stations may, for all we know, be on the air, but it doesn't do much good if you haven't got the electricity to power your TV set to see what the news is. So we appreciate that you're tuning in to CBC Radio 1. We have reporters checking what's happening at the hospitals, at the airports, with public transit. Jim Curran keeping an eye on traffic for you in this special news report that we're continuing here on CBC Radio 1 about the blackout that has hit most of Ontario and a good many major cities in the Northeastern United States. The CBC's Derek Stoffel has been looking into exactly what caused this. Derek, what's the latest?
Well, we know officials in the New York State power system say was caused in New York City. There is a power system there actually on Manhattan, and there was a problem, and it basically tripped a switch, and that has led all the way up to Canada. That switch has meant that there's no power. There's a power grid. You did mention the Niagara Mohawk power grid, and that's sort of the grid in the middle of the area, and it's caused the problem because the power hasn't been able to get through. We have now heard from Washington that it was, in fact, this power plant in New York City that caused the problem. For a while, New York's mayor, Michael Bloomberg, was blaming Canada, saying it was a problem up here. But in a situation like this, there's not a lot of information. But we now have heard for sure that it was a problem in New York that has leapfrogged its way up here. In Ontario, the different power companies are in a position to start turning the power on when they get the power, when the grid is actually turned back on. It could be hours, is what we're being told. Outlying areas, places such as Sudbury and Windsor that are sort of further away from the problem, probably will go on first. But what we are hearing is that there is a possibility of power before nightfall in places such as Toronto.
So it's not looking like it'll be the up to 6 days as happened in 1965, the last time that authorities can remember anything like this happening.
That's right. We 6 days, maybe 6 hours, hopefully here, if even less than that. So we are now waiting for the people in Ontario. They've got crews ready. All they need is basically that switch. It's probably a big switch that needs to be flicked back on. Happens, they will be able to restore power in Ontario.
All right. Well, we'll be giving you the latest on that as soon as we hear. Thanks very much. That's the CBC's Derek Stoffel. We're trying to cover off all the various areas. I mentioned earlier that we hadn't heard anything from the Mayor of Toronto, Mel Lastman. Well, the CBC's David Michael Lamb joins us now from Toronto City Hall. What's the latest?
Well, Avril, we have not indeed heard anything directly from Mayor Mel Lastman, but his spokesperson, Scott Magnish, is speaking, in fact, is speaking to reporters right at the moment. He was also down here at the offices a few minutes ago explaining that you were talking about the emergency plan for the city, and indeed the mayor is the man who officially enacts that plan, and he has apparently done so. Last we heard, he was in a police car on his way up to the city's emergency operations center in the northeast corner of the city. The mayor is on his way there, as I said, as well as the deputy mayor, the chief of police, the fire chief, and all other sort of emergency officials who will then coordinate all the operations they need to coordinate right from there. And now I did ask the mayor's spokesman, Scott Magnish, why the mayor himself has not spoken so far, as the mayor of New York has spoken on the TV and radio a number of times so far. He said, well, the mayor has to run this emergency operation, and he doesn't have time to talk to the media, so instead he's making sure that people have gotten off subways as they have gotten out of elevators and are making their way home as best as possible.
Well, I don't think the mayor of New York City, Mike Bloomberg, thinks of himself as just talking to the media. He's talking to the citizens of New York to give them information.
Yeah, and we're having a very difficult time getting information from that level here, that political level, because, as I said, the mayor's spokesman is here over and over again giving us small updates, but we're not hearing anything from direct political leaders. We're not hearing anything from the mayor himself. We're not hearing anything from the deputy mayor either. The excuse given is that they're all tied up in official duties. They don't have time to talk to the media or, as you say, the public.
David Michael Lamb, thanks very much.
Okay.
That's the CBC's David Michael Lamb. This is a CBC Radio News special, a special report about the outage which struck just before about 4:15 this afternoon as Here and Now was on the air. Details of what caused the collapse are sketchy, to say the least. We're trying to find out exactly how long it'll be before things are turned back on. Not even sure that the authorities know that at this stage of the game.
We have seen, Avril, and certainly in the downtown area, that the traffic volume has eased up. We're seeing lots of people who it looks like are just plain going to walk home. A lot of our colleagues leaving the building were
well,
going to...
It's a lovely evening for it.
Well, it is, and a lot of people in the downtown area just still just mingling around. But we've had very slow conditions reported on the Don Valley Parkway, very good conditions reported up to the northwest. In particular, the 401, the westbound 401, no problem around Highway 407. Listener did indicate on 407 going west around Torbram, conditions improve, and there are several vehicles now on the shoulder, cars which ran out of gas.
Oh.
Mentioned on the last report, too, that out to the east at the service centers along the 401, many cars now parked in the parking lots, and there is police tape around the pumps. Of course, service center unable to pump gas. Also some calls in the last while where power is on in small little pockets. Listowel, Kitchener, just had a call from Burlington. We've had power on in those areas. It's in small little isolated pockets.
Well, we have heard often enough that the gas stations are not working, the pumps are not working, and so unnecessary travel by car is probably not a good idea because you may well run out of gas and end up like those other drivers stuck on the side of the road. We're going to hear in a moment about water services and some advice for people who are thinking whether to run the dishwasher. No, you won't be doing that this evening. But we have a number of things that are affected, including water. So we'll get to that. We're also going to be hearing about how things are affected at Toronto's Pearson Airport. Pia Chattopadhyay has been keeping tabs on what's happening in Toronto. Pia, what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you, Avril, that people are taking this in stride. They clearly know what's going on, and a lot of the stores in the downtown area are closed, of course, because they don't have power, and so they actually have the employees standing at the front doors explaining to people why they're closed. On the other hand, there are several restaurants that are staying open to serve beer on this hot sunny day in Toronto. So people are sitting along the sidewalks, they're drinking water, they're chatting with friends. As I mentioned earlier, one of the most interesting things I found is the big lineups at payphones with the cell phones out.
All right, well, that's a rosy picture. It's also a difficult one for those who are trying to manage Toronto's water supply. Mike Price is the manager of water services in Toronto. Hello, Mr. Price.
Good evening.
What advice have you got for people about water consumption this evening?
Well, the advice that I'm giving out is that the only water supply we have is what is contained currently in our reservoirs and water towers. Because we do not have power, we cannot pump any water around the city. And from the City of Toronto, we also supply York Region, which services Markham, Vaughan, and Richmond Hill. So we're encouraging everyone to cut back on water use and cut out all non-essential use of water.
All non-essential use. And so what would be considered essential use of water?
Well, essential use is drinking, cooking, and when you have to, flushing the toilet. But we would encourage people to only flush when they really have to and practice what a lot of people do at the cottage, where you see the little sign that says, if it's yellow, let it mellow. So we would certainly encourage people to cut back on water use that way.
How worried are you about the water supply this evening?
We're worried not knowing the duration of the blackout. If we thought it was coming back on tonight, we wouldn't be worried at all. If it's going to last for well into tomorrow, we're starting to get worried because there are some areas that will run out before others. And once the water runs out, i.e. there's no pressure, then the fire department are unable to fight fires because they won't get water out of the fire hydrants.
And there's no extra source of water for emergency situations like that?
Well, the fire department can go to the nearest pond, or they can go to the nearest river, or they can bring in tankers, but normally they would hook onto a fire hydrant. So it will be extremely difficult for them, and certainly extremely difficult in the downtown area.
And there's nothing you can do to reserve those fire hydrant sources of water for any emergency?
It's all on the same system. The same system that provides the homes, the offices, high-rise towers, supplies the water main to the fire hydrants.
So that's it. It would just come to a drip?
Yes.
And we'd have nothing?
Absolutely. So we're encouraging people to conserve. We estimate we've got approximately 24 hours of supply on average across the city in the southern half of York Region. But without power coming back on, if people can conserve, we might be able to stretch it for 2 days or even longer. So we're certainly encouraging people to cut back.
Now, under the circumstances and with the question mark that we have about how long this could last, does it seem to make sense that a city like Toronto, also, as you say, servicing York Region, would only have 24 hours worth of water supply?
This is fairly standard design criteria, so you will find that virtually every city will be running into the same problem. Some of the smaller municipalities that get their water from the ground through wells, it is possible they've got standby diesel generators that, in fact, they can keep their pumps running. There is no standby diesel generators big enough to run our water treatment plants and to run our pumps.
Mr. Price, good luck to you, and I thank you very much for taking the time with us today.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. That's Mike Price, the manager of the City of Toronto's Water Services. Our time now is 10 to 7. This is CBC Radio 1's special coverage of what's happened with this outage affecting just about all of Ontario. We're also being broadcast on CBC Radio 2 for listeners in the area. Now, we do have Hamilton radio station CKOC says some residents from Burlington have called in to say the lights are back on. So that's likely to start rippling across Ontario, or at least we like to think it will. But it's not much consolation for those who are really in dire straits this evening, wondering how they're going to get around, how they're going to get down from, for example, very high stories in office buildings and apartment buildings. David Lepofsky is an activist working on disability issues. He is on the line now. Hello, David.
Good evening.
Now, what's your concern with this outage?
Well, I just thought it would be helpful for people to know. I happen to be blind, and I'm figuring it's soon, if the power's not on, people are going to be facing an evening of darkness, and they might want to take some steps to prepare so that they can manage with it. And I fear those of us who don't use light anyway are probably in a useful position to help people out a little bit.
All right, makes sense. What's your advice?
First advice I'd give people is I would take some steps right now to clear anything off their floor that may be piled up like shoes or whatever, because at nighttime when they can't find them, they will find them the hard way. If there's things that they know they're going to need overnight, medications or whatever, I would take them out now so that they can find them and know exactly where they are. It's usually, this is sort of blindness 101. When you lose your eyesight, as I did many years ago, you sort of have to learn this stuff, and it's just part of nature for us. But other people who are sighted, or as we sometimes call light dependent, they don't have to think about this stuff, and that's why I thought I'd share it.
No, you're right.
Take out things that you're going to need. If you're going to need water overnight or whatever, get it all lined up, know where it is, because you don't want to find it. And probably the 2 or 3 most important tips that I would suggest people consider are keep doors wide open in their apartment or their home. Don't leave them half open. I don't mean the front door. I mean like door from room to room. In the blindness world, we describe half-open doors as they sound like they're open, but they sure feel like they're closed. If you know what I mean, you sort of walk into it not knowing it's there, and they hurt. So one of the important steps that we know to live by is to keep the door open. And the other 2 things, which is going to sound remarkably obvious except you don't think of it when you need it. One is if you have to walk around at night, and if it is dark, the best thing to do in your home is to follow a wall. And keep one hand on the wall. I mean, if you're blind and you know the area you're in, you don't have to think in those terms. But if it's a new environment, you try to stay by a wall because that gives you a point of reference. You don't get sighted people, if the lights go out, get a bit disoriented, and that can be a little off-putting. So if you follow a wall, and the other thing is if you drop something, actually two other points. One is if you drop something, the one thing you don't do is bend over. You bend over, you whack your head on something. So one of the things they teach you again in sort of blindness 101 training is when you drop something, you crouch down. You stay sitting up. You stay in an upright position. You crouch down, and you use one hand to kind of sweep the floor till you find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And the one other thing is the stereotypical thing you see on TV if somebody's in the dark is of course they stick out their hands, right?
Sure.
Don't do it. If you stick your hands out with your fingers pointed, it's going to hurt if you find something. What you actually do is you take your hands, if you're in a strange environment, and you hold them up, one in front of your face and one maybe a little more outstretched, and you curl your fingers loosely away, like in a sort of a bent fingers kind of away from you a little bit. And then if you're walking, if you contact anything, whether it's a wall or whatever, your fingers will just naturally curl.
All right. Well, boy, that's all such good advice. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. We do
I
appreciate
thought I'd give a unique opportunity to share some helpful advice, I hope.
I think it is good advice. Thank you very much.
Take care.
David Lepofsky is an activist with Disability and Ontario's organizations with disability now, or at least organizations that help those with disabilities. Now, we do have, of course, an expectation that this could continue for some time. We have no idea when it'll end. However, we can tell you that almost 2 hours after the blackout, some officials at Hydro One are saying the power is beginning to come back on, slowly restored in some areas, but most people could be forced to wait out the blackout in the dark. So if not employing those tips we just heard, you might want to make sure that you've got your flashlight, your candles all ready to go for tonight. Now, just a reminder that Hydro One is saying the Ontario power system is not at fault here. Quote, we're confident that the trigger for this widespread outage did not occur on our system, saying an official from the Crown Corporation that runs the power grid. So again, slowly restoring power here and there in various parts. We have word perhaps Burlington is back in some areas. But in the meantime, a lot of advice coming to people. Try to conserve water because there's only 24 hours of water supply in Toronto at the very least. And also some advice now from those who are working at Bell Canada. Don Blair is on the line. Hello, Mr. Blair.
Yeah, Avril.
Now, what's your advice for the phone users?
Well, just to let people know out there that Bell's networks do remain functional. But as expected, we're experiencing a very high level, extraordinarily high level of traffic on our networks. So we would ask people to stay off landline and cell network to avoid congestion so that we can ensure that people who need to make emergency calls can make calls. We're also experiencing an extremely high level of calls to operator services. So when people press 0, it seems that a lot of people are pressing 0 right now to find out what's going on out there. We ask that they don't do that unless it is an emergency situation.
And don't call 911 for that either.
Exactly. No, 911, of course, reserved only for emergency situations. So we want to make sure that those calls that need to get through do get through.
Okay, actually, I'm just getting word that police are asking people not to call 911 in Toronto. I guess those lines are overloaded as well. Perhaps I'll just take a minute here to give you the other line to call. There's a special line that's been set up, which is area code 416-808-7063. So you might want to jot that down for Toronto Police if you need it tonight. 416-808-7063. Now, Mr. Blair, you say that things are overloaded. You're worried that the system can't handle things. What are the repercussions if it gets to be too much on the phone lines?
Well, if it continues, I mean, it is at a high level right now, but as I did mention, it remains functional. People would get a fast busy, so anyone, let's say, who is trying to make an emergency call, trying to call 911, they would get a fast busy instead of getting through. But at this time, things are working. However, again, we ask people to stay off the phone lines. That's both cell and landline, to make sure that those calls that are emergencies do get through. to the appropriate emergency operators.
We'll keep that in mind. Thanks very much, Mr. Blair.
Thank you, Avril.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's Don Blair, Media Relations for Bell Canada. Now, the province of Ontario is expected to bring back electricity over the next 3 hours, with the various utilities working hard on this. Niagara-on-the-Lake is now back on. Grimsby is on, but the City of Toronto has been cut off the grid for now, with Toronto probably being the last to come on stream once everything gets working again. The City of Toronto is asking people to conserve water. Emergency supply can only last about 24 hours, so a reminder that only if you absolutely must flush the toilet. Otherwise, just leave it for now, and only if you absolutely must use water for drinking and so on. Police asking you not to call 911 unless it's an absolute emergency, or call the alternate line 416-808-7063. And Jim Curran is here now with an update on traffic.
Well, in the downtown area, it certainly has improved. We've been getting much information just by looking out our window. Still lots of pedestrians milling about or now heading home, but much improved along the Front Street area, along the Gardiner Expressway going west, no problem. The Don Valley Parkway has been very slow, but it's been looking good. On the 401, had a call earlier from Highway 407 out to the west by the merge at Highway 401. We've had several vehicles running out of gas. They are now on the shoulder of the road. And again, if you take it easy, and reminder that when you approach an intersection with no one directing traffic, treat it as an always stop.
Thanks very much, Jim. And still to come, we'll have news at the top of the hour here on CBC Radio 1. I'm Avril Benoit, CBC Radio 1. It will continue to cover this story, the blackout affecting most of Ontario and Northeastern United States.
This is a special bulletin on the power blackout that's affecting millions of people in Toronto, across Ontario, and throughout New York State. I'm Bernie McNamee. The power outage has brought public transit to a halt. It's leading to chaos on the roads and creating difficulties for hospitals trying to cope with emergency power. Major airports are closed. Here's how one emergency official described the situation in Toronto.
Obviously, we're pretty busy, and there's been lots of car crashes and incidents like that, but we're prioritizing their responses and getting out there as best we can. All we've heard from the hospitals is they're pretty busy as well, and they're in the same position in terms of backup generators. So they're not going to be able to operate at full capacity. They have power in their, ICUs and things like that, but they're going to be impacted by this as well.
Larry Roberts from Toronto Emergency Medical Services. The power outage swept across Ontario and several states just after 4 o'clock this afternoon. CBC reporter Peter Armstrong has been trying to determine just how far spread the problem is. Peter, what can you tell us?
Well, Bernie, we first heard about the power outage reaching several blocks away from us here at the Broadcast Centre in Toronto, and that obviously changed very quickly. First, we heard that it was spreading through the province to North Bay, Windsor, Sudbury, Hamilton, Kingston. Then news alerts started to come across through the news wires saying that New York, Detroit, Cleveland, New Jersey, Toledo, Ohio, Rochester, New York were all suffering from power outages. The biggest center, of course, is New York City. We've seen hundreds and hundreds of people flowing out of buildings and out onto the streets. This is, of course, a city still extremely edgy after the attacks of September 11th. So we saw people actually running down the highways between cars stuck in traffic. Now, we have heard from several levels of government, of course, including the Office of Homeland Security, saying this is not an attack, but an actual power failure, and they're trying to fix it. Now, we are being told that some of the power is coming back online in parts of New York and now parts of Ontario, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Grimsby, for example, and we're hoping to get power back online in Toronto. It's been taken off of the grid. They're hoping to get it back up and running in the next few weeks. Another good sign, we've just seen cable television coming back online here in the Broadcast Centre. So some good signs, but nothing concrete yet.
So, Peter, what are emergency officials telling people to do?
Well, the main thing is to conserve and obviously to stay calm, to stay together and remain collected. A main thing is that they are telling people to do is to turn off all non-essential appliances during this outage. There are concerns that if the power comes back on and all of these appliances are on, there could be a new surge and cause further disruptions to the power system. But the main thing is stay calm, drink water, and try to stay cool in the heat. Obviously, the next few hours will be crucial to see if they can get these back online for nightfall.
Good advice. Thanks very much, Peter. Peter Armstrong in Toronto. Now, Derek Stoffel joins me in studio. And Derek, you've been looking into the why of this big story. Big question is, what happened?
Well, we know now from officials in the United States, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission says it is all because of a problem at a power plant in New York City. We do think it's a Con Edison plant in the island of Manhattan. We don't know exactly what the problem was. There were early reports of a fire that's been dismissed, but when something happens, something like this happens, smoke billows from a power plant such as this, and people did report seeing that. What we know then happened next was a cascading effect. It's basically like a switch was tripped, and that turned off the power first in New York City, and then it jumped further away and eventually, hopscotched its way up to Canada, to Toronto, Ottawa, and areas beyond. That's because there's a grid called the Niagara Mohawk grid, and it's a fairly small grid, only serves about 1.5 million customers, but it's sort of the buffer in between these big areas, and it couldn't handle the pressure here. It went down, and that meant millions of people now are without power.
And no reason as to how this cascading effect takes effect.
Well, basically what I've been able to determine is that it's a safety feature, that when there is a problem, this cascading effect, it's like a trip switch, and it's for safety reasons so it doesn't overload and cause fires and things like that. So it is a normal situation. Now the big question is when the power will come back on. We're hearing reports that in New York City that's beginning to happen. What they're going to do in Ontario is they're going to turn, Toronto will probably be last because it's such a big consumer of power. So they're going to start with the smaller cities, as Peter mentioned, Niagara-on-the-Lake, and then they will work their way through the smaller cities, and crews are standing by to, once the power is restored through this grid, to restore it here to the bigger cities such as Ottawa and Toronto.
All right, Derek, thanks very much. Derek Stoffel in Toronto. In the United States, the blackout hit New York City, the rest of New York State, and some areas of Connecticut and New Jersey. The power went off with the temperature across the region in the low 30s, just as millions of people were about to join the rush hour. Of course, that's 30 degrees Celsius. Our correspondent Frank Koller joins us from Washington, which has not been affected by the blackout. Hello, Frank.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Frank, certainly many New Yorkers say the first thing they thought of was a terrorist attack. What's been said on that?
And I confess it was the first thing I thought of when I looked here in Washington and looked up at the TV screens and saw this story starting to unfold. There's been no indication. Officials have said over and over again anything untoward other than something resembling the kind of electrical failure, system failure that Derek just talked about. That's been reiterated by the FBI, from the Department of Homeland Security, and most recently the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, as well. The governor is talking about this. I think he's almost about to start, actually, in Albany. Certainly the mayor said there's no evidence. He was very much delivering a message of calm for New Yorkers, that there had been no injuries, no criminal activity. He emphasized that the 9/11 services were working well and that all fire, police, and paramedics were on duty. And he kept saying over several times that the water system was safe and just encouraged people to drink a lot of water in the heat.
Frank, darkness will soon be falling across the region. What's expected tonight?
Well, their hopes are that the power will slowly come on. Again, as Derek indicated, there are signs that in some of the areas outside of New York City, the power is starting to come on. And the mayor said roughly an hour ago, his hope is hours. He said not minutes, but hours. New Yorkers are a tough bunch. In 1965, in the big blackout, New York City went without power for 11 hours. In 1977, they went for 25 hours without power. This is something they know well, but as I mentioned, the mayor said that New York police will be on duty to prevent looting or any kinds of problems. It's not clear when the subway will be up and running, so I think tomorrow will be a pretty crazy day in Manhattan.
All right, Frank, thanks so much.
Good night.
Frank Koller in Washington. The power outage has also affected major airports, including John F. Kennedy and LaGuardia airports in New York. Flights at Toronto's Pearson International have been grounded, and all check-in desks have stopped processing people. The CBC's Yvette Brend is at Pearson. Hello, Yvette. What is the situation where you are right now?
Well, right now at the airport, things are heating up, and these long, snaking lines of families that are bunked on their baggage are starting to thin a bit as the lack of air conditioning starts to make this building very hot, and they begin to head home. The flights were grounded and check-in stopped not long after 4 o'clock, and people have been told by many airlines now just to go home because it's very unlikely there'll be any flights out tonight. They're being told they can refund their flight, they can rebook their flights another day and just, not be charged for it. The only people that look happy here right now are there's a whole bunch of hotel workers rallying outside, and they've got a generator. So as the hotel turns people away because they have no power, there's a group of sort of rallying people. Security is urging people to stay calm, and there's been more water and pot brought up, but nobody's moving very far right now.
Yvette, what's happening to the flights, all the flights that were due to come into Toronto?
Well, everything just ground to a standstill, so nothing has been rebooked, nothing is happening because they don't have any information about what the cause of the power failure is and how long it will take to put it back online. There was a military policeman earlier that I was talking to that said there was something about lightning that might have struck a power plant, but they don't know how long that will take, a couple of hours or into tomorrow, so they can't really rebook anything or plan anything. I don't know if you remember the ice storm or the computer glitch that happened earlier, and it took, because all the flights get backed up, often even if the flight started again by 6:30 tomorrow, it would be hours and hours before the people that were supposed to fly here at 4:30 got a flight.
And how are people's tempers?
Well, they look glum, but they look sort of resigned to it. Nobody panics, that's for certain. And there was a ham radio operator that offered to set up and help people phone families around the world and let them know they're not coming. I talked to a 74-year-old woman.
Okay, Yvette, we've got to wrap that up. Thanks very much. That's Yvette Brand. This is a special bulletin on the power blackout that's affecting millions of people in Toronto, across Ontario, and throughout New York State.
Good evening. I'm Avril Benoit. CBC Radio's coverage of the power blackout continues on Radio 1 and Radio 2. And as we carry on here, we want to check what's happening in various parts affected. We're going to be checking in certainly with the IMO that controls electricity supply in the province. It has called a news conference, and we'll be speaking to Ontarians sometime around 8 o'clock this evening. We will carry that live. And checking the drive through southern Ontario is Jim Curran, who's been watching rush hour traffic and beyond. What's the latest, Jim?
Well, as far as rush hour traffic goes, it's pretty much done. In the downtown core, traffic volume now very light, and we're getting calls now about conditions first along the Gardner Expressway. No problem at all going west, although it does bunch up on the eastbound lanes heading over to the base of the Parkway. And the bottom end up the Don Valley has been very slow, but very good conditions reported in the Toronto area along the 401, and certainly no problem out to the west of Toronto. Highway 407 heading out through to the 401. Traffic is very light through there as well. Had a call from a listener up in the Orillia area reporting conditions on Highway 11. Again, traffic volume is very light, also indicating that at some of the gas stations they seem to have power, which makes them very popular places. We've had along Highway 401 at the service centers a call earlier indicating that because the power was out, of course, gas stations unable to pump gas. There was police tape around the pumps, and many people looked like they were settling in for the night, arriving at those service centers either with no gas or very little gas and really nowhere to go. So again, in the downtown area, a lot of people walking, but the traffic volume has eased off.
Well, we're also checking what's happening in and around air traffic. Flights headed to Toronto's Pearson International Airport are being diverted to Winnipeg because of the massive power outage, which is affecting central Canada and northeastern United States. At least 4 flights from Victoria, Vancouver, and Calgary were on their way to Winnipeg, and more are likely to be diverted there. Airport spokesperson Christina Longy says the airport can accommodate them. Many flights to and from Toronto and Ottawa are being delayed or cancelled, so passengers are advised to check with their airlines. Manitoba Hydro spokesperson Glenn Schneider says they are supplying power to northwestern Ontario, but he says the outage isn't affecting the delivery of electricity in Manitoba. In fact, northwestern Ontario in and around Thunder Bay and the areas hugging the Manitoba border were not affected at all by this, but most of the rest of Ontario was. And here to tell us how the leadership in Ontario is handling this and what it has to say for itself is the CBC's Pia Chattopadhyay.
Avril, Ontario's premier has called back his cabinet members to Toronto to deal with the power blackout that's affected almost all of this province. A spokesperson for the premier says the government still doesn't have much information about the cause of the power outage, but he says that the premier has been briefed by his ministers of energy, health and emergency safety. The premier, of course, was supposed to be at a nomination meeting tonight in Orangeville and is now making his way back to Toronto, where he's expected to make a statement sometime later this evening.
All right, and we're also expecting to hear from municipal authorities, certainly in Toronto, emergency measures, services getting together, the various components, notably ambulance, hospitals, the traffic and TTC people are all getting together trying to figure out how they're going to handle this. We have heard earlier that as electricity comes back on in area by area around Ontario, the last place to get the electricity back on could well be Toronto. So we'll be keeping you posted on that. In the meantime, we have Tom Adams on the line from Energy Probe. Hello, Mr. Adams.
Hello.
Now, what do you make of what's happened here this afternoon?
Well, we're still at the stage where we don't have much information as to the cause, but it certainly bears a strong resemblance to events that occurred back in 1965.
Would you care to remind us what happened? We heard a little bit about it earlier, but I suspect not as much as you can tell us.
Well, back in 1965, the vulnerability of the way we organize our power system was demonstrated very graphically. A small routine failure of a small electrical switch at a transformer yard in Ontario, near Niagara Falls, caused some generators to be knocked off the power system, disconnected automatically from the power system. That caused a fairly large disturbance in the power system that caused other generators to be automatically disengaged from the power grid. And the result of it was a cascade of mechanical failures that caused blackouts as far south as Manhattan. In that case, it took some parts of the grid 3 days before the power authorities were able to restore service, although I'm reasonably optimistic that in this case they should be able to get most of the grid up faster than that.
And why do you think it'll be so much faster this time?
Well, the good news is that since 1965, the emergency preparations for events of this kind have made a lot of progress, and the power grids have on kind of hot standby preparatory plans for how to get the grid restarted. So they have to, there's a very complex technical challenge. The power generating stations, almost all of them require the grid itself to be operable before they can generate. So there are specified generators that can be brought online from what's called a black start condition, and those generators are identified. The systems are in place to bring it back.
What do you think is likely to happen then over the course of the next couple of hours as authorities say, look, we've identified the problem, we at least have a rough idea what's going on, and we're about to bring things back?
Well, what will happen is that regions of the blackout that are close to regions where they still have power, on the fringes of the blackout, so to speak, they will be restored to service first.
So, for example, Ottawa, if it's close to Quebec where there is power, could end up with its power restored soon enough?
That's a special case. Quebec's power system is not directly connected to Ontario, so there are ways of bringing power across, but it's more cumbersome. I'm more optimistic about people that are blacked out to the west. So southwestern Ontario, northern Ontario, they're probably the ones that are most likely to be restored quickly.
And where ultimately will Toronto be getting its power from if it has to wait that long?
Oh, well, Toronto may have to wait towards the end of the restoration of service. This is speculation at this stage, but Toronto has some special transmission problems or deficiencies into this area. So it may be that Toronto's power will have to wait a little longer. The likelihood is that the power will flow into Toronto mostly from the west of the city.
Yeah, well, we do have a word that Hydro One is going to try to decouple from the U.S. system and see if Ontario can run on the province's own grid system. Does that sound like a good idea to you?
Well, yes. What all these affected grids will try to do is to isolate their systems from the problem areas, and try to get these particular generators that have the so-called black start capability, to get them up and then restore power to sections of the high voltage grid sufficient to get other generators back online.
Tom Adams, thanks very much for sharing your expertise with us.
Okay, modest as it is, in light of the deficient information, but it may be of some assistance.
Yes, we appreciate it. Thanks very much. That's Tom Adams from Energy Pro. Our time now is 18 minutes after 7. We have a statement from the Prime Minister. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister's office says emergency preparedness officials have made some headway into figuring out why the power outage occurred. Jim Munson says National Defence and the Office of Critical Infrastructure Protection and Emergency Preparedness are confirming that lightning struck a power plant in the Niagara region on the U.S. side. The overload cascaded 9,000 square kilometers from Chicago to New York, Toronto to North Bay to Boston. Hydro One is going to try to see if it can decouple, as I mentioned earlier, from that U.S. system. Now, we've also been told through this message about what's going on in Manhattan itself. We've had conflicting reports on this, and we're certainly checking on it because there have been some confirmations that it actually happened in New York City. So we'll get to that shortly. Now, to talk about what's happening with Pearson International Airport and other Toronto area airports, I'm joined by Peter Gregg, General Manager for Communications with the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. Hello, Mr. Gregg.
Good evening.
Now, what's the situation for you folks at this hour?
Well, we're operational. We have backup power that keeps all of our essential operational equipment going, but obviously a vastly disrupted schedule. We're taking arrivals. We're not seeing a lot of arrivals coming in at this point because a lot of the aircraft that were in the air have diverted to other airports.
But there are some arrivals?
We're open for arrivals, and as they come, we'll take them in. But the last time I checked, we didn't have anything within a 300-mile radius at this point.
Because things are being diverted. The flights are being diverted.
And the major airports that are being affected in other jurisdictions, especially down in the States, there just hasn't been anything coming out of there. So there aren't a lot of aircraft in the sky at this point. We are concentrating on international departures, and we are able to send transatlantic international departures this evening. We have seen a few departures in the last hour and a half or so.
A few. And so how many do you think will be canceled?
It's it's something that's up to NAV Canada, the air traffic controllers, and the airlines themselves to make that decision. If NAV Canada can get them out, they will try to get them out, but the airline needs to make a decision based on its schedule, whether or not they can go. So I think any advice to travelers who've got a departing flight booked tonight is to double check with their airline just to confirm whether or not it's actually going.
And what about those who are expecting passengers to come in this evening?
Well, we are taking arriving flights, but again, I think the best thing to do is call up the airline and find out if that flight that was destined for Pearson is actually coming here, or has it gone elsewhere, has it turned around. We don't have specific information on all those flights at this point.
Now, Pearson was in the news the other day because of lots of congestion with the Air Canada check-in and so on. What's the crowd like there now?
It's not too bad. Obviously, there was a fair crowd toward the end of the afternoon when this disruption hit, but we're not too bad at this point. I think a lot of people have heard the message not to come out to the airport, not to expect to get out of here on many flights. So we're not seeing a lot of people coming to the airport, and a lot of people who were here did go home.
Will the airlines honor those tickets, though?
You'd have to ask the airlines individually what their plans are. Unfortunately, I don't have that information.
Mr. Gregg, thanks very much for taking the time.
Thanks, Amber.
Bye-bye. That's Peter Gregg, General Manager for Communications with the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, which manages Pearson International. It's 22 minutes after 7 here at CBC Radio 1 and 2. Special coverage of the power blackout affecting just about all of Ontario continues, with Jim Curran giving us a check on traffic in Toronto.
and just north of Toronto as well. Looking along Highway 407, it did have a call earlier, listener reporting very good conditions on 407 going west, merging with the 401. But a call a moment ago, another listener is telling us that through Highway 10, it is indeed very slow. And as he made his way west along Highway 407, just north and west of Toronto, counted about 30 vehicles on the side, either out of gas or broken down. And that has been as much the story at this point. It's vehicles, cars running out of gas rather than having other difficulties. The traffic volume in many areas has improved, eased off. Along the Newmarket area. And listener, actually one of our colleagues called, made the trip, was in Newmarket when the power went out, had just arrived home in Peterborough. It took the 3 hours, also indicating with the power out in a few spots, there were some gas stations. Obviously, they had generators because they were pumping gas. But that is the issue, certainly along the 401 at the service centres. A lot of people parked, obviously having to wait till the power comes on before they can gas up and keep going.
Yeah, unessential trips, definitely not a good idea under the circumstances. Although we will keep you posted as power begins to come back on over the next several hours, or at least we're hoping for that. The CBC's Mimi Tompkins is reporting back in from New York City to tell us what's going on there. Mimi, what's the latest?
Well, the latest is the officials are just really trying to keep people calm, asking people to walk home slowly, to not get heat exhaustion. The traffic is at a complete standstill in Manhattan as cars are trying to get out. They've actually closed the bridges coming into the city because there are too many cars in Manhattan right now. I've noticed, I've been listening, that there's question about what is at the source of the problem. And Mayor Bloomberg gave a news conference about half an hour ago, and he says that the source of the problem is in northern New York or southern Canada. So there's no mention at all of any of this having originated in Manhattan or New York.
Well, that certainly is. Yeah, we're following these various reports. The spokesperson for the Prime Minister in Ottawa saying that it's definitely on the U.S. side. So
yeah,
they're tossing it back and forth a little.
Right. I think they've got the area of Niagara Mohawk region. That's what they're saying down here. Those are what the reports are.
Right, upstate New York.
Upstate New York, exactly. Or southern Canada, they said.
Now, tell me about the bridges then. With the bridges being closed, New Yorkers, at least for those who have had terrifying experiences in New York cabbies, one gets the sense that they're very hot-tempered when it comes to traffic. How are people managing the road rage through all the congestion? We seem to have lost Mimi Tompkins. We'll get back to her from New York City. It's 25 minutes after 7. This is special coverage of the blackout that has hit New York. Along with New York State and some areas of Connecticut and New Jersey, the power went off with the temperature across the region in the low 30s. It was 30 degrees in Toronto, just as millions of people were about to join the rush hour at about 4:15 this afternoon. Now, reporting in from Queen's Park in Toronto is the CBC's John McGrath. John, what are you hearing?
Avril, I just received a phone call from Premier Eves, who's right now in the OPP police station in Caledon, waiting for a helicopter to bring him back to Toronto. And I thought I'd play you just the full text of the interview I had with the Premier. Here it comes.
Hello, John.
Premier Eves.
How are you?
I'm okay. When will you be back into town?
Well, I'm operating right now from the OPP station in Caledon. I have been for some time. We've been hooked in with the emergency measures team in Queen's Park. The emergency measures system in the province is fully operational, as indeed our systems at MTO and health hospitals are all running on generators. We do have Hydro One reporting that they are getting some parts of the province back online as we speak. They are trying to get Bruce and Darlington hooked up as quickly as possible because they are the two largest sources of power that they can hook into the grid immediately. And we do know that the problem was created south of the border in New York State. At the time that this occurred, around 4:30 this afternoon, we were using about 25,000 megawatts of power. We were only importing some 1,700 from New York State, but unfortunately, as you know, all the grid systems are interconnected in northeastern part of North America, so we all pay the price when one has a serious problem.
There's any idea how soon full power is going to be restored to the province?
No, but they're hoping that they can get Bruce and Darlington up fairly quickly, and that should do a great deal to alleviate. They do have some power back on now, but they're just doing it as quickly as they can. So we will try to give you updates from time to time as the night goes on. I'll be taking the OPP helicopter as soon as it gets here from Aurelia down to emergency headquarters in Toronto.
There's been some suggestion from the United States that the problem actually occurred up in the Ottawa area.
Well, that's interesting, but that's not the case. Our information is it was probably upstate New York. There was one report early on, which is where the confusion may come from the Erie Mohawk station in Ottawa, Pennsylvania. That may be where the confusion lies.
The governor of New York State has declared a state of emergency. Are you considering doing that here?
Well, we virtually have done the same thing by putting our emergency measures system into operation, and it's been in operation since 4:30.
So we are in a state of emergency?
Well, we are with our emergency measures operation system going full tilt. We have been since this occurred.
When do you expect to make it back into the city?
I expect to be there within the hour.
Should people worry? What do you have to say about
the situation is under control, both from a health point of view, from an MTO point of view, and from a hydro point of view. We just have to, Hydro One has to work at getting as much power back online, hooked back up into the distribution system as they possibly can, as quickly as they can.
Are people going to have power by tomorrow morning?
We certainly hope so.
Thank you, Mr. Premier.
Thank you very much, John.
Well, that's the interview that I had just moments ago with Premier Eves.
And he's waiting for a helicopter to bring him to Toronto.
He's waiting for the OPP helicopter from Barrie. He's not the only person who's having trouble getting around in this blackout.
Oh, well, we're not sure about that, but still, was he not expected to be at a nomination meeting in Orangeville this evening?
Yes, he was originally expected. I was going to be going up there, in fact, for his nomination meeting at 7:30, where he's going to be nominated for the riding of Dufferin Peel Wellington Grey. But given this situation, to try and hold a nomination meeting would be almost farcical. So plans were rapidly dropped, and he's now trying to get back down to the city. And he's recalled the cabinet, and we expect to have a statement and some questions from him outside the Emergency Operations Centre in downtown Toronto.
All right, we look forward to the latest. Thank you very much.
Okay, Avril.
That's Queen's Park reporter John McGrath. Now, the blackout began at about 4:15 this afternoon, and we've had, as we just heard, a lot of back and forth about what really caused it. The latest from the Prime Minister's office in Ottawa is that it is retracting its earlier assertion not too long ago, which was to the effect that a lightning strike had hit the power grid somewhere on the U.S. side. So they're saying it's still on the U.S. side that they think it happened, but they're not sure exactly why it happened, but probably not a lightning strike. Now, the phone number to reach us, if you'd like to call in with your view on what's going on, if you have something to report in, is 1-800-416-8333. It's 1-800-416-8333. Now, of course, it's a beautiful evening. The weather's awfully nice for a stroll if you do find yourself stuck walking home. And as you walk home, you might want to pull into the local pub. That's what Elliot Halperin did. He is at Dora Keogh's pub on Danforth Avenue in Toronto. Elliot, you lucky dog. What are you doing there?
Well, I'm standing here in the Dora Keogh, which has probably about 25, 30 people in it, and there's a nice community feeling. It's all candlelit now, and it's very, very dark inside, and it's a very nice place to be. Much better to be here than out on the street.
Yeah, is the beer still cold?
The beer is still cold.
Are they serving hot mash or anything like that, though?
No, they're not. But they seem to, they maybe, who knows, maybe they're going next door to the variety store and picking up ice from there.
And what are people around the bar saying about the blackout?
Well, they're saying interesting things. Some people are very concerned about what it's going to be like this evening, what's going to happen after dark. Should they go home now, or should they stay downtown, or what they're going to do as the evening wears on. There's a couple of girls here who are from Ireland and Scotland, respectively, who are visiting for the summer, who have a completely different perspective on blackouts.
Because they have them so often.
Yeah. it's sort of business as usual for them.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, many people can recall blackouts happening much more frequently than they do now. But the scope of this one is so vast. To have an entire city, let alone almost an entire province out, it just brings it a whole new dimension.
That's right. I mean, I don't remember this happening since the mid-'60s.
Yeah, well, that's what they say, 1965. Elliot, enjoy the evening.
Thanks, Avril.
That's Elliot Halperin enjoying the candlelight, get-together at Dora Keogh's Pub on Danforth Avenue in Toronto. Jim Curran, what's the latest from you?
We have been able to find in many areas, of course, the police still directing traffic through intersections without signal lights, and regular citizens also directing traffic at other intersections. And I guess as darkness becomes a factor, again, we want to stress as you approach an intersection with the lights out, treat it as a four-way stop or an all-way stop, but we have people out helping direct the traffic, and they're not dressed with reflective clothing on. And so, again, another reason to approach those intersections with extra caution. But we certainly have seen in the downtown core of the city the traffic volume become quite light. Stretches of the Gardiner Expressway, no problem at all going west, but other areas it remains very slow. In fact, a call a while ago from Highway 407 westbound through Highway 10, that has been very slow. And again, a listener reporting counted about 30 cars along the side of the road, either broken down or probably out of gas.
Well, for those who have a tendency not only to stay at work beyond 5, 6, 7, even 8 o'clock at night, this is actually they were forced to come home, or to at least evacuate, to abandon the buildings. Lots of elevator evacuations and all the rest, as the power outage began at about 4:15 this afternoon. CBC Radio is continuing its special coverage of the blackout. We're broadcasting on CBC Radio 1 and Radio 2. Now, a couple of words of advice that we've received from authorities is to perhaps bundle together your candles and flashlights for later when the sun goes down. Conserve water is another big one, because the water supply for Toronto, at the very least, is only about 24 hours. And so really, if you don't have to flush the toilet, if you don't have to pour the bath and all the rest, just don't, because there won't be enough. And also, if you have anyone you're expecting on flights, or you're planning to fly out from any of the airports that are affected by the blackout in Ontario, call the airline, because there's a good chance that those flights are cancelled, or they've been rerouted, as some were rerouted, expected to land in Toronto and ended up landing in Winnipeg instead. Now, earlier this afternoon, politicians at various levels of government have been pulling together their emergency teams to try to figure out what should be done to help people. In Toronto, earlier we spoke to Deputy Mayor Case Otis, who was pulling together his top people from all the different services, including water, electricity, the TTC, the police, ambulances, and we're expecting to check in with him shortly to find out what exactly they're going to be doing, what they're advising people to do under the circumstances. Now, we also have word that the IMO that controls electricity supply in the province is going to be holding a news conference. Will fill us in on what's going on. That should be at around 8 o'clock tonight. Now, Deputy Mayor Case Otis is on the line with us now. Hello, Mr. Otis.
Hello.
Now, what can you tell us coming out of your meeting?
Well, we've been meeting at our emergency control center with all the heads of the emergency services, the police, ambulance, fire, and so on, to make sure that we're on top of this and that we communicate the right messages to the public in terms of conserving water, making sure that the air conditioners are turned off so that we don't get a huge surge once the power is turned back on. People have been behaving extremely well in terms of traffic and so on. The subway system has been cleared, so things are under control.
Things are under control, and what is the timeline?
Well, we understand, I just had word that apparently the Premier is flying to Toronto, and that he has indicated that the power will be back on in the morning. So hopefully that's true.
Hopefully that's true. Have you heard anything else to suggest it could go on longer?
Not at this point, no. We've heard that it certainly wasn't any kind of sabotage or terrorist attack, which is obviously foremost on people's mind, so that's important. But other than that, we'll stay on top of it, and hopefully it will be turned on tomorrow before. And I I would assume that most businesses, if it isn't on, will stay closed for obvious reasons.
Now, what about special efforts to reach those who might be in trouble, who might have difficulty getting out, getting help?
Yeah, there are people that are stuck in elevators that are being attended to as quickly as possible by our emergency services. We're asking people to watch their neighbors, especially the elderly, to make sure that they're okay, and asking people not to go out because there really isn't anywhere to go to restaurants or theaters. So stay home unless you absolutely have to go out.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the elevators, and that's something we haven't heard too much about. With all the skyscrapers in a city like Toronto and the surrounding areas, any idea how many people, how many elevators have
No,
people?
we don't have the number at this point, but we know that our fire department is addressing the situation, but we don't have a tally of the numbers. But they are trying to reach them as quickly as possible.
Mr. Otis, thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you for calling.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's Case Otis, Deputy Mayor of Toronto. It's 7:38. This is CBC Radio 1 and 2, and we're welcoming your calls now to give us a sense of how things are going in your neck of the woods. Our phone number is 1-800-416-8333. That's 1-800-416-8333. We'll open it up and hear how the blackout is affecting you in various parts of Ontario. First caller is Gail Stevens in Huntsville. Hi, Gail. Have we got Gail on the line? It looks like we don't. So we'll try to get her back up, and we'll line up the next caller, 1-800-416-8333. So just to recap a little bit, we are expecting that the power will be restored area by area. And in fact, the expectation is that areas in northwestern Ontario and northern Ontario will receive the power first, and Toronto could well be the last. So if you want to let us know if your power's back on, if it was on earlier, we'd love to hear about that. 1-800-416-8333. Now, back to the whole source of the problem. We had a number of, conflicting reports. Politicians in the United States saying that it perhaps was coming from the Canadian side. Officials at the PMO saying, no, it's the United States side, perhaps in the Niagara-Mohawk region. And so we're covering that. We're trying to get a sense of when the grid actually went down, why it caused this cascading effect, why Ontario was affected to such an extent. Now, on the medical side of things, always looking at some of the concerns for medical authorities, we know that the hospitals have emergency generators, and the first thought goes to what if someone was in the midst of surgery? What about the babies in incubators? To give us a sense of how hospitals operate when there is no electricity from the main source is our health specialist here on CBC Radio 1, Brian Goldman. He's an emergency physician at a Toronto hospital. Hi, Brian. Oh, we'll go. We don't have Brian on the line. We'll go to Jim Curran, who joins me now to give us an update on traffic in Toronto.
Well, let's look to the east. This time I had a call just a moment ago. We've been talking about how varied the conditions are. Many routes still very slow, and others where the traffic is moving along very well. Along the 401 east of Toronto, it's good news. No problem at all from the east end of the city all the way through to the Bowmanville area. Listener reporting that there are many cars along the side of the 401, along the shoulder as well. At the truck stop, the fifth wheel truck stop in Bowmanville, there is no power and lots of parked cars and trucks by the powerless gas pumps. I would like to also mention our phone number, our cell phone number. We have some troubles getting cell phone calls through, but if you are out and about and can give us an update on conditions where you are and your cell phone works, our number here is Starlink. That is star 5465 on the cell phone if you use Bell Mobility or Rogers AT&T.
All right, thanks. Now, as for the phone number that I was giving out earlier, a correction. It's 1-888-416-8333. I believe that's the cross-country checkup number, 1-888-416-8333. Give us a call from where you are in Ontario. Tell us what's happening. Tell us if the electricity is back on. Tell us how you're managing. Again, 1-888-416-8333. I'm Avril Benoit. This is special coverage of the blackout that's affecting most of Ontario and a good many cities in northeastern United States, including New York City. Now we have Gail Stevens calling in from Huntsville. Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Good to talk to you. How are things in Huntsville?
Well, there's an awful lot of people here without any hydro, but it seems to be doing pretty good. I remember in 1965, I was only 13 when we had no hydro there for quite a while. So all I did was I went to work and was able to fill up a bunch of jugs with some water, just in case we needed it for later on.
Well, that's a very good point. It's the water shortage in Toronto is something that authorities have been warning us about, asking people to conserve. Have you received any sort of advisories from local authorities in Huntsville?
Well, we're on well and septic, so we're stuck on our own.
Yeah.
So, and the one problem with Huntsville is we don't have, our radio station doesn't work when the hydro's out. So, I'm in the car right now listening to your radio station. It's one of the few we can get. So.
All right. Well, I do appreciate the call.
Okay.
Take care, Gail.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Again, the phone number of 1-888-416-8333. It is one of the complexities, certainly, of our line of work, is that we're trying to stay on the air. Sometimes you may notice that there's a bit of a dropout in our signal, and that's all to do with the power outage. We actually went off the air only for about 30 seconds earlier this afternoon when it all started, but our emergency system kicked back in, and we appreciate that you're getting your information here, though at this hour, there's not a whole lot to give you other than just the precautionary notes from police. Don't call 911 unless you absolutely have to. The phone lines are overloaded with people trying to call and saying that they're getting home late and all the rest. So Bell Mobility and Bell Telephone Services are saying that if you can avoid making a phone call, that would be appreciated because, after all, the emergency lines have to remain open. Now, the other thing is I mentioned water, but there is also the question of getting around. The gas stations don't work, so if you're expecting to make a trip tonight, you might want to cancel that because you might not be able to fill up your car. Now, earlier this afternoon in Toronto, when the power went out at about 4:15, there were a good many people who were stuck in the subway system in Toronto, on the TTC cars, in the tunnels. Here's some of what they had to say.
Well, at first I thought it was just a routine stop because the subway stops occasionally, right? And then when the power started going out, it got a little nerve-wracking. And our car didn't have an intercom, so we couldn't hear what was going on until the engineer came through the cars and told us each what was going on. And they said we had to evacuate. And basically all I'm thinking is I'm going to be really, really late to meet my friends. Yeah, I think most people were pretty calm about it. Like, most people are pretty level-headed when it comes to this kind of thing. I mean, there are a few people trying to, push their way to the front of the car because it got really hot. And, of course, you have people getting claustrophobic down there, of course. I mean, we weren't there that long, maybe about a half hour before they evacuated us. Kind of blacked out, and everybody had to walk through the tracks. It was interesting, actually, and we were pretty close to the station, so it wasn't too